A dusty Texas highway under a merciless July sun. Blinding red and blue lights strobing through the heat haze. A shredded piece of military plastic fluttering on the blistering asphalt. What happens when a power-hungry officer pushes the wrong man too far? He wasn't just another civilian in a beat-up sedan. He was a highly decorated military officer holding a clearance level most local cops couldn't even fathom. When this arrogant officer snapped his military identification in half, he thought he was untouchable. He had no idea his entire world was about to be flipped upside down. The late afternoon sun hammered down on the cracked asphalt of Highway 195, a long, unforgiving stretch of road leading straight toward the gates of Fort Cavazos, Texas. For Captain Elijah Reynolds, the dry heat felt like a welcome homecoming. He had spent the last 14 months in the high-altitude biting winds of a remote forward operating base overseas, managing classified logistics that kept thousands of troops alive. Today, however, he wasn't Captain Reynolds of the United States Army. He was just Elijah, a weary traveler in a faded gray college hoodie, loose sweatpants, and worn-out sneakers, driving a 10-year-old Honda Accord that rattled whenever it pushed past 60. Elijah's eyes were bloodshot from jet lag, a delayed layover in Dallas, and the sheer emotional exhaustion of transitioning from a war zone back to civilian life. His hands rested loosely on the steering wheel. The radio hummed low. He was only 20 miles from the base, 20 miles from a hot shower, a real bed, and a debriefing that would finally allow him a month-long leave. Habit made him check his rearview mirror, a reflex ingrained from years of situational awareness training. That was when he saw them. The violent strobe of red and blue lights cut through the dusty haze behind him. A heavy-duty police cruiser rode dangerously close to his bumper, appearing out of nowhere. Elijah frowned. He glanced at his speedometer. 53 in a 55 zone. Registration up to date. Taillights good. Lane perfect. No reason to be pulled over. Still, military discipline ran deep. Comply. Assess. Resolve. He signaled, eased off the gas, and guided the Honda onto the gravel shoulder. The cruiser followed with a short, impatient whoop of its siren. Elijah shifted into park, killed the engine, and rolled down the window. Hot, dusty air washed over him. He kept both hands planted firmly at 10 and 2 on the wheel. In the side mirror, he watched the cruiser door swing open. Officer Derek Mitchell stepped out, large, heavily built, tight buzz cut, dark reflective aviators masking his eyes. His uniform was pressed to a razor edge, contrasting with the lazy, predatory swagger of his walk. One hand rested pointedly on the butt of his sidearm. Even through the mirror, Elijah could read the body language. This wasn't a cautious routine stop. This was the puffed-up strut of a man who enjoyed the power of his badge. Mitchell stopped just behind the driver's door, positioning himself in Elijah's blind spot so he had to twist uncomfortably to look up. He took a long moment looking over the car's interior, empty coffee cups, the dusty duffel bag, and finally, Elijah himself. Dark skin, practical close-cropped hair, oversized hoodie, the narrative locked into place in Mitchell's mind. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Mitchell asked, voice low and gravelly with condescension. "I can honestly say I do not, officer," Elijah replied clearly, tone completely neutral. He had faced warlords and managed crisis negotiations under fire. A belligerent traffic cop would not rattle him. "You swerved," Mitchell stated flatly, an accusation entirely fabricated. "Crossed the yellow line back there about 2 miles ago." Elijah's mind reviewed his driving instantly. He hadn't swerved. The road had been perfectly straight. "With respect, officer, I believe you might be mistaken. I've been maintaining a steady speed and staying perfectly centered." Mitchell leaned closer, resting his forearms on the roof, invading the cabin. The scent of cheap cologne and chewing gum filled the air. Are you telling me how to do my job, boy? The word struck like a physical blow, heavy, deliberate, designed to strip him of autonomy and respect. Elijah's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he smoothed his features into professional detachment. No, sir. I am simply stating my perspective. I'm just trying to get to the base. Mitchell let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. The base, right? Let me guess. You got a buddy stationed up there, trying to sneak in and surprise him. He stepped back and tapped the side of the door. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now. Elijah took a slow, deep breath. He reached over to the passenger seat and unzipped the top pocket of his tactical duffel. Mitchell immediately unclipped the retention strap on his holster. Slowly, he barked, hand gripping his weapon. My hands are visible, officer, Elijah said calmly, pulling out a slim black leather wallet. I am retrieving my identification. He opened the wallet. His Texas driver's license was right at the front. He pulled it out along with the insurance card and handed them through the window. Mitchell snatched them, holding them up to the sunlight as if expecting forgeries. He stared at the picture, then at Elijah, lips curled into a sneer. He was looking for any reason to escalate. In his mind, he had already decided Elijah was a problem that needed his specific brand of solving. Mitchell stared at the license for what felt like an eternity. He flipped it over, scratched at the corner with his thumb, then looked back down, expression hardening. Elijah Reynolds, he read aloud, drawing out the syllables as if tasting something sour. Address listed in Austin. What are you doing all the way out here on 195 if you live in Austin? I am currently stationed nearby, Elijah replied, voice incredibly level. The heat in the car was rising, but he refused to let discomfort show. I'm in the process of moving my primary residence. Stationed. Mitchell's eyebrows rose above the rims of his aviators. He looked Elijah up and down again. Baggy hoodie, tired eyes. What, you work at the cafeteria on base serving mashed potatoes to the real soldiers? Elijah's knuckles whitened slightly against the steering wheel. He had served 3 tours. He had lost friends. He held a rank that commanded the respect of hundreds of highly trained operators. Yet here on the side of a dusty road, he was being reduced to a punchline by a man whose authority extended no further than a county line. I am a captain in the United States Army, Elijah stated, voice taking on a sharper, more authoritative edge, though it remained perfectly controlled. I am returning from an overseas deployment. Mitchell laughed, a loud, ugly sound that echoed off the empty highway. A captain, right? And I'm the President of the United States. You think I'm stupid, buddy? You think I haven't seen every stolen valor scam in the book? People like you steal uniforms, print fake IDs, and try to get military discounts or sneak onto federal property to steal equipment. I can assure you, officer, I am exactly who I say I am, Elijah said, eyes locking onto Mitchell's through the dark lenses. If you run my name, it will check out. Oh, I'll run it, Mitchell spat. But I want secondary ID right now. If you're a captain, you have a CAC card. Let's see it. Elijah nodded slowly. It is in my wallet. I'm going to reach for it now. He deliberately pulled the wallet back into his lap and slid his thumb over the familiar rigid plastic of his common access card. It was the key to his entire professional life, secure facilities, classified networks, and his identity within the Department of Defense. He pulled it free and held it out the window. Mitchell snatched it with the same aggression. He held the white card up. It bore Elijah's photo in full uniform, sharp and rested, along with his rank, DODID number, and the embedded smart chip. Mitchell studied it, jaw working as he chewed his gum aggressively. For a brief second, Elijah thought he might finally realize his mistake and let him go. Instead, a malicious smirk spread across Mitchell's face. "This is a joke," Mitchell said, shaking his head. "This is the worst fake I've seen all month." Elijah's eyes widened slightly in genuine shock. "Excuse me? That is a federally issued military identification card. It is entirely authentic." "The font is wrong. The chip is crooked," Mitchell lied effortlessly, tapping the card against his palm. "Where do you print this, boy? Some internet cafe? You think slapping Captain on a piece of plastic makes you untouchable?" "Officer Mitchell," Elijah said, voice dropping an octave into the command tone he used when ordering troops into active combat zones. "I highly advise you to run that card through your system or call the military police at Fort Cavazos. They can verify my identity in exactly 10 seconds. Do not make a mistake you cannot undo." The sudden authority in his voice, the complete lack of fear, deeply unsettled Mitchell. But rather than back down, his ego flared violently. He hated being told what to do, especially by a man he had already categorized as beneath him. "Are you threatening a sworn officer of the law?" Mitchell demanded, taking a step closer to the door. "I am giving you a statement of fact," Elijah replied coldly. "That card is federal property." "This card," Mitchell sneered, holding it up with both hands, "is contraband, and as a law enforcement officer, it is my duty to confiscate and destroy fraudulent documents." Elijah's breath caught in his throat. "Do not bend that card." Mitchell looked him dead in the eye. With a sharp, deliberate flick of his wrists, he bent the thick plastic card backward. There was a sickening crack as the microchip fractured, and the plastic snapped cleanly in two. Silence descended on the highway, broken only by the idle of the police cruiser. Mitchell tossed the two broken halves of the military ID through the open window. They landed on the passenger seat against the duffel bag. "Now," Mitchell said, voice dripping with venomous satisfaction, resting his hand on his gun again. "Step out of the vehicle. You're under arrest for possession of forged federal documents and lying to a police officer." Elijah looked at the broken pieces of his life's work sitting on the seat. The sheer audacity of the act temporarily paralyzed him. Destroying a military ID wasn't just a petty insult, it was a federal offense, destruction of government property, and it effectively grounded him. Without that card, he couldn't access the base, couldn't log into his deployment debriefs, couldn't process his return. He turned his gaze slowly back to Mitchell. The anger radiating from him was palpable, cold, and absolute. "You have absolutely no idea what you just did," Elijah whispered. The deadly calm in his voice made Mitchell involuntarily take a half step back. "Out of the car now!" Mitchell bellowed, trying to regain his dominant posture, unholstering his handcuffs. Before Elijah could reach for the door handle to comply, knowing that resisting an armed, erratic cop on a deserted highway was a death sentence, a low, powerful rumble shook the asphalt. Approaching from the direction of Fort Cavazos, moving at well over 80 miles per hour, was a massive, pitch-black Chevrolet Suburban. It had deep-tinted windows, heavy brush guards, and federal government license plates. As it neared the traffic stop, it didn't slow down to pass. Instead, it slammed on its brakes. The heavy tires screamed against the asphalt in a cloud of white smoke. The SUV swerved violently onto the shoulder, stopping just inches from the front bumper of Elijah's Honda, cutting off any forward escape and boxing Mitchell in. Mitchell spun around, hand instinctively dropping to his sidearm, startled by the sudden and aggressive arrival of the government vehicle. The dust was still settling as the heavy doors of the Suburban clicked open in unison. 4 men stepped out of the Suburban simultaneously. The 2 in the front were massive, broad-shouldered individuals wearing unmarked tactical vests over dark polo shirts, their posture radiating intense coiled readiness. They didn't draw weapons, but their hands rested casually near their belts, eyes scanning the scene behind dark sunglasses. They were federal agents, likely Army Criminal Investigation Division, and they moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency that made Mitchell's small-town police training feel instantly inadequate. From the rear driver's side door emerged a man who immediately commanded the atmosphere of the highway. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with sharp weathered features and iron-gray hair cropped close to his scalp. He wore the standard-issue operational camouflage pattern uniform of the United States Army. On his chest, centered with immaculate precision, was the silver eagle of a full-bird colonel. Above it were rows of ribbons and a combat action badge that spoke of decades of deployment and command. This was Colonel Raymond Caldwell, the base commander of the Logistics and Intelligence Division Elijah was reporting to. Mitchell's throat suddenly felt entirely dry. His bravado, so robust just moments prior, began to fracture under the sheer weight of the colonel's presence. But Mitchell was a stubborn man, poisoned by his own arrogance and an absolute refusal to admit fault. Instead of de-escalating, he puffed out his chest, attempting to project an authority he was rapidly losing. "Hey, back in your vehicle!" Mitchell shouted, voice cracking slightly. He pointed a trembling finger at the federal agents. "This is an active traffic stop. I am conducting an ongoing investigation. Back off right now, or I will arrest you for interfering with a police officer." The two tactical agents did not even blink. They didn't speak. They didn't flinch. And they certainly didn't retreat. They simply stepped out wide, securing the perimeter of the two vehicles, effectively trapping Mitchell between his cruiser and Elijah's Honda. Colonel Caldwell ignored Mitchell completely. He didn't look at the screaming local cop, didn't acknowledge the threat of arrest, and didn't slow his stride. His boots crunched against the gravel as he walked directly past Mitchell, so close that the officer could feel the displaced air. The colonel's eyes were locked entirely on the battered Honda Accord and the man sitting in the driver's seat. "Hey, did you hear me?" Mitchell bellowed, face flushing a deep, angry crimson. He took a step toward the colonel, hand gripping his gun tighter. "I said stop right there." Faster than Mitchell could comprehend, one of the tactical agents moved. The agent didn't draw a weapon, but he stepped directly into Mitchell's path, planting his feet firmly into the gravel. The physical blockade was absolute. The agent looked down at Mitchell, expression as unreadable as carved granite. "Take your hand off your weapon, officer," the agent said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, terrifyingly calm directive. "Do it right now." Mitchell swallowed hard, looking from the massive agent back to the colonel, who had now reached the driver's side of the Honda. Elijah had remained perfectly still throughout the sudden arrival. He knew exactly who was in the vehicle. His delayed arrival at the base had triggered a security protocol. When a logistics officer holding top-secret clearance goes off the grid for more than 2 hours en route to a secure facility, the military does not send a tow truck. They send a retrieval team. Colonel Caldwell stopped right outside Elijah's window. He looked at the tired eyes, the civilian clothes, and then down at the passenger seat. His eyes narrowed instantly as they locked onto the 2 snapped pieces of the common access card resting on the duffel bag. The microchip was visibly cracked, the plastic severed right through the printed photograph. The colonel's jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. He looked back at Elijah, expression softening just a fraction, a silent acknowledgement of the ordeal he had just been put through. Then, ignoring the chaotic situation surrounding them, ignoring the furious local police officer screaming in the background, Colonel Raymond Caldwell, a man who commanded thousands of soldiers and oversaw multi-million-dollar defense budgets, took a sharp step back. He brought his feet squarely together, his back straightened to a rigid, flawless line. With crisp, undeniable precision, the colonel raised his right hand, fingertips touching the brim of his patrol cap, and rendered a perfect, sustained military salute to the man sitting in the beat-up Honda. "Welcome home, Captain Reynolds," Colonel Caldwell said, voice carrying clearly over the warm wind. "I apologize for the delay in your reception." Elijah, despite his exhaustion, despite the lingering adrenaline of the traffic stop, felt the deep, familiar comfort of the military structure settling around him. He unbuckled his seatbelt, shifted his posture to a seated position of attention, and returned the salute with equal sharpness. "Thank you, sir," Elijah replied, dropping his hand. "It's good to be back." Behind the colonel, Officer Derek Mitchell stood frozen. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. His hand had fallen limply away from his gun. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He watched the full-bird colonel hold the salute for a black man in a faded hoodie, a man he had just threatened to arrest, a man whose military identification he had just intentionally destroyed. The reality of the situation crashed down on Mitchell like a physical weight. The man he had called a liar, a fraud, and a boy was exactly who he claimed to be. And the man treating him with the utmost reverence was someone with the power to end Mitchell's career with a single phone call. The silence that followed the colonel's salute was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed down on the highway, entirely smothering Officer Derek Mitchell's earlier bravado. Colonel Caldwell slowly lowered his hand, eyes never leaving Elijah's face. "Are you injured, Captain?" Caldwell asked, tone shifting from ceremonious to strictly operational. "Did this individual physically assault you?" "No, sir," Elijah replied evenly, voice steady and professional. "No physical contact was made. However, he did confiscate and destroy federal property." He gestured toward the passenger seat. Caldwell's gaze shifted back to the broken plastic on the duffel bag. He reached through the open window, picking up the two halves of the shattered common access card. He held the pieces up in the sunlight, examining the cracked embedded microchip. The destruction of a standard military ID was a serious offense. The intentional destruction of a high-level clearance smart card belonging to a commanding logistics officer returning from a classified deployment was a staggering federal crime. Caldwell turned slowly to face Mitchell. The colonel's demeanor was terrifyingly calm. There was no screaming, no frantic posturing like Mitchell had displayed. There was only the cold, mechanical wrath of a commanding officer who had just witnessed an assault on one of his own. "Agent Lawson," Caldwell said, without looking away from Mitchell. The tactical agent who had blocked Mitchell's path stepped forward instantly. "Sir." "Contact the local municipal police chief," Caldwell ordered, voice sharp and clipping the air like a whip. "Tell him he has exactly 10 minutes to get down to Highway 195 before I place his officer in federal custody and have him transported to the holding facility at Fort Cavazos." Mitchell panicked. His earlier terror morphed into a desperate, flailing attempt at self-preservation. "Wait now, hold on just a damn minute," he stammered, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. He was swerving. He presented a fraudulent ID. "You can't just come into my jurisdiction and—" "Your jurisdiction," Caldwell interrupted. He didn't raise his voice, but the absolute authority in his tone caused Mitchell to snap his mouth shut. The colonel walked slowly toward the police officer, holding the broken pieces of the ID card in his palm. "Do you know what this is, officer?" Caldwell asked softly, stopping mere inches from Mitchell. "It's a fake," Mitchell insisted, though his voice lacked any conviction. He was sweating profusely now, large drops rolling down from under his aviator sunglasses. "Look at the font. Look at the chip. I've been on the force for 8 years. I know a fake when I see one." "This," Caldwell said, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is a Department of Defense Common Access card belonging to Captain Elijah Reynolds. He is a logistics and intelligence coordinator who has spent the last 14 months managing supply lines in hostile territories that you couldn't point to on a map. This card contains highly classified digital certificates. It is government property issued under the authority of the Department of Defense, and you just intentionally destroyed it." Mitchell swallowed loudly. He looked suspicious. He didn't look like a captain. "I was doing my job." "You were profiling a weary soldier trying to get back to base," Caldwell corrected him, eyes boring into Mitchell's. "You allowed your prejudice and your pathetic ego to dictate your actions. You assumed that because he is a black man in a worn-out car, he could not possibly hold a rank that demands your respect. You assumed he was an easy target." Caldwell stepped closer, forcing Mitchell to lean back against the hood of his own police cruiser. "Under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1361, Caldwell recited flawlessly, "willful depredation of property of the United States government is a federal felony. Furthermore, you detained a commissioned officer of the United States Army without probable cause while he was under federal deployment orders. You have crossed a line that your local badge cannot protect you from." "I'm a sworn officer," Mitchell squeaked, voice cracking entirely. "I don't need to arrest you, Officer Mitchell," Caldwell said coldly, reading the name tag pinned to Mitchell's crisp uniform. "I just need to hold you here until your chief arrives to strip you of that badge. If he refuses, the FBI will be pulling you out of your bed tomorrow morning for destruction of classified government property. The choice is entirely up to him." Agent Lawson approached, holding a satellite phone. "Colonel, Chief Barnes is on the line. He's en route. ETA is 6 minutes. He sounds highly cooperative, sir." "Excellent," Caldwell said, finally turning his back on Mitchell. He walked back to Elijah's car. "Captain Reynolds," Caldwell said, tone softening back to that of a mentor. "Go ahead and step out of the vehicle. Let Lawson grab your bags. You're riding back with me in the secure transport." Elijah finally opened the door and stepped out onto the highway. He stretched his stiff legs, pulling the gray hoodie tight against the sudden evening breeze. He looked past the colonel, eyes locking onto Officer Mitchell. Mitchell looked pathetic, stripped of his false authority, surrounded by heavily armed federal agents, and waiting for his own police chief to arrive and end his career. He looked small and terrified. He couldn't meet Elijah's gaze. He stared down at his polished black boots, chest heaving with panicked breaths. Elijah didn't gloat. He didn't hurl insults. He possessed a quiet, unshakable dignity that Mitchell could never comprehend. He simply reached into the front seat, grabbed his keys, and handed them to the second federal agent who had approached to secure the Honda. "Thank you, Colonel," Elijah said, standing tall next to the man who had come to his defense. "I appreciate the extraction. I believe I am well overdue for my debrief." "That you are, Elijah?" Caldwell smiled, a rare expression of genuine warmth. "Let's get you on base. Your team has been waiting." As Elijah walked toward the armored Suburban, the flashing red and blue lights of Mitchell's cruiser reflected in the windows. They no longer looked like symbols of authority. They looked like a distress signal for a man who had finally pushed his power too far and crashed violently into a wall of true unyielding consequence. The wail of a new siren pierced the heavy, stagnant air of the Texas afternoon, rapidly growing louder from the direction of town. Within moments, a white Ford Explorer with the local police department's insignia emblazoned on the side came tearing down the highway. It slowed sharply, pulling onto the gravel shoulder behind Mitchell's idling cruiser. The flashing lights painted the dusty surroundings in alternating flashes of harsh red and blue, highlighting the absolute ruin of Officer Derek Mitchell's day. Out of the SUV stepped Police Chief Robert Barnes. He was a man in his late 50s, carrying the heavy, exhausted posture of someone who had spent 30 years cleaning up other people's messes. He had a thick, graying mustache and a deeply lined face that currently bore an expression of profound irritation and mounting dread. Barnes had received the call directly from the base operations center. He had dealt with Fort Cavazos personnel for decades, maintaining a delicate but necessary working relationship with the military installation. He knew that when a full-bird colonel personally halted a traffic stop and demanded his presence, someone in his department had made a catastrophic error. Chief Barnes surveyed the scene as he walked forward. He saw the black government Suburban blocking the road, the two massive federal agents standing like stone statues, the terrified look on his patrolman's face, and Colonel Caldwell standing tall and unyielding. "Colonel Caldwell," Chief Barnes called out, quickening his pace. He extended a hand as he approached. "I got your call. What exactly is the situation here?" Caldwell did not take the offered hand. He simply held up the two broken pieces of Captain Elijah Reynolds's common access card. "Chief Barnes," Caldwell began, voice a low, rumbling force that carried no warmth whatsoever. "Your officer decided to conduct a baseless traffic stop on one of my logistics commanders, Captain Reynolds, who is currently returning from a 14-month classified deployment. During this illegal detainment, your officer accused him of presenting fraudulent identification, refused to verify his credentials, and willfully destroyed federal property." Barnes stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the shattered plastic in the colonel's hand, eyes widening as he recognized the embedded microchip of a military ID. The blood rushed out of the chief's face. He knew exactly what that card represented and the immense federal weight behind it. He slowly turned his gaze toward Mitchell, who was visibly trembling against the hood of his cruiser. "Mitchell," Barnes said, voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. "Tell me right now that the colonel is mistaken. Tell me you did not snap a United States military identification card in half." Mitchell swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing erratically. He looked to his boss for salvation, but found only condemnation. "Chief, he didn't look right. He was in a beat-up car wearing sweatpants. He didn't look like a captain. I thought it was a stolen valor situation. People buy those fake IDs online all the time." "He didn't look like a captain," Barnes repeated, the sheer stupidity of the defense washing over him. "What does a military officer off-duty look like, Mitchell? Do you expect them to drive around in a tank wearing full-dress blues? Did you even attempt to run the name through the database?" "He was getting mouthy," Mitchell pleaded, voice pitching higher in desperation. "He started giving me orders, telling me to call the MPs. I was establishing control of the scene." "You were establishing a federal felony," Caldwell interjected, tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You profiled him, Mitchell. You saw a black man in civilian clothes and decided his authority was a threat to your ego. Now, Chief Barnes, I have a decision to make, and it involves the FBI, the Department of Defense, and a federal indictment for destruction of government property, unless you handle this immediately." Chief Barnes didn't need further prompting. The liability standing before him was monumental. If the military brought federal charges down on his department, it would trigger a Department of Justice investigation, ruin their funding, and end his own career. Barnes walked directly up to Mitchell. "Turn around, Derek." Mitchell's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Chief, come on. I've been on the force for 8 years. You know me. You're going to take their side over your own man?" "You are not my man right now. You are a massive liability," Barnes growled, stepping into Mitchell's personal space. "You destroyed a DOD-issued smart card. You illegally detained a commissioned officer. You embarrassed this uniform, this department, and this county. Turn around, put your hands on the hood of your car, and do not say another word." Mitchell let out a pathetic, stuttering breath, but the authoritative command of his chief finally broke his stubborn resistance. He turned around slowly, placing his hands on the warm metal of the cruiser. "Derek Mitchell, you are hereby suspended indefinitely without pay, pending a full internal and federal investigation," Barnes announced, voice echoing over the quiet highway. He unclipped Mitchell's radio from his shoulder, then reached down and unbuckled the heavy leather duty belt that held Mitchell's sidearm, taser, and handcuffs. The belt fell away, leaving Mitchell looking entirely stripped of the power he had abused just 20 minutes prior. Barnes then reached up and unpinned the silver badge from Mitchell's chest. He held it in his hand for a moment before looking back at the colonel. "Colonel Caldwell, I take full responsibility for the actions of my department," Barnes said, tone heavy with regret. "He is stripped of his authority as of this second. I will personally escort him back to the precinct, process his suspension, and cooperate fully with any federal investigators you send our way." "Expect CID within the hour, Chief," Caldwell replied, coldly, lowering the broken ID card. "And a team of JAG lawyers by tomorrow morning. Have your files ready." From the darkened tinted window of the armored Suburban, Elijah watched the entire exchange unfold. He sat in the plush air-conditioned leather seat, the tension finally beginning to drain from his exhausted muscles. He watched Mitchell, a man who had sneered at his existence, standing disarmed and disgraced on the side of the road, his career completely destroyed by his own arrogant prejudice. He felt no pity for him. He only felt a profound sense of justice, a rare moment where the system functioned exactly as it should to protect those who served it. As Agent Lawson climbed into the driver's seat of the Suburban and put the massive vehicle into gear, Elijah looked away from the flashing lights. The highway incident was over. It was time to go home. The gates of Fort Cavazos materialized like a heavily fortified oasis at the end of the long highway. The black Chevrolet Suburban approached the checkpoint, bypassing the long lines of civilian contractors and standard military vehicles. As the SUV rolled toward the primary security booth, the heavily armed military police officers on duty recognized the vehicle's plates instantly. Without asking for identification, the gate guard snapped to a rigid, synchronized salute, holding it until the massive vehicle had completely cleared the perimeter. Sitting in the back seat, Captain Elijah Reynolds exhaled a long, steady breath. The transition from the dusty, hostile environment of the local highway to the structured, hyper-secure reality of the military base was jarring but deeply comforting. Here, he wasn't a civilian target. He was an apex professional in a system built on mutual respect and absolute chain of command. The Suburban glided through the sprawling base, weaving past massive motor pools filled with armored personnel carriers and pristine geometric administrative buildings. They finally pulled up to a heavily guarded windowless concrete structure that housed the Central Intelligence and Logistics Command. Colonel Caldwell turned around in the passenger seat, looking back at Elijah. "Go get showered and changed, Captain. Take an hour, then meet me in briefing room 4. We have a lot of ground to cover regarding your deployment, and we need to get your temporary credentials sorted." "Yes, sir. Thank you again, Colonel," Elijah replied, grabbing his tactical duffel bag. An hour later, Elijah walked down the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the command center. He was no longer wearing the faded gray hoodie and sweatpants. He was dressed in his pristine, tailored operational camouflage pattern uniform. His captain's bars gleamed on his chest, perfectly aligned. The exhaustion in his eyes was still there, but his posture was flawless, radiating the quiet, lethal competence of a seasoned officer. He swiped his newly issued temporary access badge at the door of briefing room 4. The heavy reinforced door clicked open. Inside, Colonel Caldwell was waiting alongside 2 other individuals. One was Major Peterson, Elijah's direct counterpart in domestic logistics, and the other was an officer Elijah hadn't met before, Captain Olivia Davis, a sharp-eyed woman wearing the insignia of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the military's legal branch. "Have a seat, Elijah," Caldwell offered, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. "Before we get into the classified logistics from your overseas rotation, I want to formally close the loop on what happened this afternoon." Elijah took a seat, placing his notebook on the table. I assumed the situation was handled, sir. It is being handled, but it requires your formal statement, Captain Davis chimed in, opening a thick manila folder. Captain Reynolds, I am assigned to your case regarding the incident with former Officer Mitchell. I say former because Chief Barnes formally terminated his employment 30 minutes ago. He didn't even wait for the suspension to clear. Elijah raised an eyebrow. That was fast. It was necessary, Davis continued, tone strictly business. The destruction of a common access card is a direct violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1361. Because the card contained classified cryptographic keys, the Department of Justice is treating this with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, because he detained you under color of law without probable cause, violating your civil rights based on blatant racial profiling, the FBI's Civil Rights Division has formally taken over the investigation. What exactly does that mean for him? Elijah asked, keeping his voice neutral. It means Derek Mitchell is currently sitting in a federal holding cell, Davis stated with grim satisfaction. He is facing up to 10 years in federal prison for the destruction of government property, plus additional years for the civil rights violations. He has permanently lost his law enforcement certification. He will lose his municipal pension, and he is entirely unhirable in any security or government capacity for the rest of his life. Major Peterson leaned forward, shaking his head. All because he couldn't stand the idea of a black man outranking him in life. The guy threw away his entire future for a 5-minute power trip. Arrogance is a highly destructive force, Major, Caldwell noted quietly, looking at Elijah. Are you prepared to sign the sworn affidavit regarding the events? We want this legally airtight before sunset. I am ready, sir, Elijah said, taking the pen. Captain Davis slid the document across the table. As Elijah read through the typed statement, verifying the meticulous details of Mitchell's aggression and the subsequent arrival of the base commander, he felt a profound sense of closure. He had spent the last year dodging mortar fire, managing complex supply chains in the most dangerous regions on the planet, and surviving through sheer grit and intelligence. He refused to let a small-town bully leave a permanent mark on his return. He signed his name at the bottom of the document with a fluid, confident stroke and slid the paper back to Captain Davis. Excellent, Davis said, closing the folder. We will handle the rest, Captain Reynolds. You won't even need to appear in court. The dash cam footage from his own cruiser corroborated everything you said. He practically convicted himself on tape. Thank you, Captain, Elijah nodded. Colonel Caldwell clapped his hands together, shifting the energy in the room entirely. The legal matter was closed. It was time to return to the mission. All right, gentlemen and ladies, Caldwell said, pulling up a digital map on the wall monitor. The legal drama is over. Let's get back to the real work. Captain Reynolds, the floor is yours. Walk us through the supply chain bottlenecks you encountered in Sector 4. Elijah stood up, picking up his laser pointer. The memory of the dusty highway, the flashing lights, and the broken plastic faded into the background. He was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was trained to do. He took a deep breath, looking at the map of the overseas territory, and began his briefing. The system had protected him, but his true power came from his own unyielding resilience. Derek Mitchell would spend the next decade staring at the walls of a federal prison cell, wondering how he had miscalculated so catastrophically, while Captain Elijah Reynolds continued to lead, unbroken and entirely undefeated. 6 months had passed since the sweltering afternoon on Highway 195, but the chilled, sterile air of the United States District Court in Austin felt like an entirely different universe. The rich mahogany panels and towering marble columns of the courtroom projected an aura of absolute unyielding law. Captain Elijah Reynolds, now wearing the gold oak leaf of a newly promoted major on his crisp Army service uniform, sat straight-backed in the front row of the gallery. His dress blues were immaculate, a stark contrast to the man sitting at the defense table a few yards away. Derek Mitchell looked nothing like the puffed-up, arrogant predator who had strutted down the highway 6 months prior. The crisp local police uniform was gone, replaced by a baggy, faded orange federal prison jumpsuit. His tight buzz cut had grown out into an uneven, patchy mess, and his face was pale, hollowed out by months spent in a federal holding facility. His wrists and ankles were bound by heavy steel chains that clinked loudly whenever he shifted his weight. He kept his eyes glued to the polished wooden table, entirely unable to look at the gallery behind him. The sentencing hearing was supposed to be a mere formality. Mitchell had taken a plea deal to avoid a protracted, highly publicized trial, pleading guilty to the destruction of government property and civil rights violations. But as the proceedings began, Mitchell's defense attorney, a sweaty, frantic man in a cheap suit, made a desperate final play for leniency. "Your Honor," the defense attorney pleaded, gesturing weakly toward Mitchell, "my client acknowledges his severe error in judgment, but he was an 8-year veteran of the police force." This was an isolated incident, a singular moment of severe miscalculation brought on by the high-stress environment of highway patrol. We asked the court to consider a reduced sentence of 3 years. "He has already lost his career and his pension. He is a broken man." Judge Harrison, a stern, white-haired man who had served on the federal bench for 2 decades, peered over his reading glasses. He looked entirely unimpressed. Before he could speak, the lead federal prosecutor, flanked by JAG Captain Olivia Davis, stood up from her table. "Your Honor, the government strongly objects to any characterization of this crime as an isolated incident," the prosecutor stated, voice echoing sharply through the quiet courtroom. "In fact, we have recently declassified a piece of evidence obtained during the FBI's execution of a search warrant on Mr. Mitchell's residence." Mitchell's head snapped up, a look of sheer, unadulterated panic washing over his pale face. The prosecutor picked up an evidence bag containing a small, battered wooden cigar box and held it up for the judge to see. "During the raid on the defendant's garage, federal agents discovered this," the prosecutor continued, tone dripping with disgust. "Inside this box, agents found 14 different identification cards. 6 were driver's licenses. 8 were military common access cards. All of them belonged to active duty military personnel or veterans, and all of them belonged to minorities." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom gallery. Major Elijah Reynolds narrowed his eyes, a cold fury settling in his chest. "The defendant did not make a singular error in judgment on Highway 195, the prosecutor declared, slamming the evidence bag down on the table. "He was running a systematic, racially motivated campaign of harassment. He targeted service members of color, confiscated their federal identification under false pretenses, and kept them in a box as trophies of his own bigotry. Major Reynolds was simply the first victim who had the clearance, the rank, and the command support to stop him." Mitchell buried his face in his chained hands, letting out a muffled, pathetic sob. The illusion of his momentary lapse was completely shattered. He was exposed not just as a bad cop, but as a systematic predator. Judge Harrison's face darkened with a localized, terrifying rage. He looked from the evidence box to Mitchell, then out to the gallery where Major Reynolds sat in perfect stoic silence. "Does the victim wish to make a statement before I hand down my sentence?" Judge Harrison asked, voice low and dangerous. Elijah stood up. He didn't walk to the podium. He simply stood by his chair, his presence commanding the entire room. "No, Your Honor," Elijah said, voice clear, steady, and devoid of any emotional vulnerability. "The evidence speaks to his character entirely. I only ask that the court ensures he can never wear a badge or hold power over another American citizen for the rest of his natural life." He sat back down, the gold oak leaf on his lapel catching the courtroom lights. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. He picked up his wooden gavel. "Derek Mitchell," the judge boomed, voice filling the cavernous room. "You were entrusted with the sacred duty of protecting the public. Instead, you used your badge as a shield for your own cowardice and prejudice. You targeted the very men and women who put their lives on the line to defend this nation. You are a disgrace to law enforcement and a disgrace to this country." Mitchell trembled violently, refusing to look up. "I am rejecting the defense's plea for leniency," Judge Harrison finalized. "On the charges of destruction of classified government property, deprivation of rights under color of law, and the newly admitted evidence of systematic civil rights abuses, I sentence you to the maximum allowable penalty, 12 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole." The gavel slammed down with the finality of a gunshot. Mitchell let out a wail as two heavily armed federal marshals grabbed his arms, hauling him up from his chair and dragging his chained, stumbling body out of the courtroom toward a holding cell. Elijah watched him disappear through the heavy side door. There was no joy in his heart, only a profound, settling peace. The system had worked. A predator had been permanently removed from the streets, and 14 other voiceless victims had finally received their justice. As the courtroom cleared, Colonel Raymond Caldwell stepped up beside Elijah, a proud smile on his weathered face. "Ready to get back to base, Major Reynolds?" he asked. Elijah smiled, adjusting his service cap. "Yes, sir. We have a lot of work to do." Together, they walked out through the heavy mahogany doors, leaving the shadows of the courtroom behind and stepping out into the bright, unyielding sunlight of their future. What an absolutely incredible story of justice and karma. Derek Mitchell thought he could abuse his power and prey on someone he deemed beneath him. But he messed with the wrong military officer and paid the ultimate price. Major Elijah Reynolds proved that true strength and dignity will always outshine ignorance and prejudice. If you loved watching this corrupt cop get exactly what he deserved, and you support our brave men and women in uniform, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life stories of justice served.